Hi, and welcome back to Behind the Banner podcast with your host, Paulson Victoria. We are continuing on from our last episode, Menstruation and Religious Purity. So there's so much. It might even be a part 3. And I'm literally doing this the next day after I made part 1 because I'm so hyped to continue talking about this. And I did even more research last night about what other faiths have beliefs on periods. So I wanted to put some more good stuff in because there is a lot of bad, really, where it comes to women not being it's not really been that positive. So I wanted to put a more positive spin on it, more than negative. But there is still going to be lots of negative, so do apologize. So we're going to continue on. So Hinduism, in certain interpretations, it's got a complex and diverse set of beliefs and practices, and views on menstruation vary significantly based on religion, set, and cultural context. Traditionally, some interpretations of Hinduism associate menstruation with impurity and have prescribed certain restrictions for menstruating women. These restrictions might include not participating in religious rituals, not entering temples, or avoiding communal activities. This view is rooted in some ancient scriptures and practices, including the Manusmriti and certain interpretations of the Vedas. However, many modern Hindus and scholars emphasize that menstruation should not be seen as a source of shame or impurity. Some contemporary movements in Hinduism challenge these stigmas and promote a more natural and positive view on menstruation. So, sacred aspects of menstruation in Hinduism. Goddess worship. Many goddesses in Hinduism are associated with fertility, the womb, and the female divine. The goddess Kali, for example, is associated with the cycles of life, death, and rebirth, and can be viewed as a powerful, menstruating figure. The idea that women are connected to the divine during menstruation is seen in some religions, where the time of the cycle is viewed as a period of increased spiritual energy. So there are menstrual celebrations in some communities. Rituals to celebrate menstruation are held. In certain tribal and rural communities, young girls entering puberty might undergo special rituals, special rites of passage, where they are celebrated and are seen as entering a new stage of life. Natural process. The cycle of nature of menstruation is seen as a part of the natural order and is in harmony with cosmic rhythms. The idea of life cycles, such as a moon's phases or the changing seasons, is often mirrored in Hindu views of menstruation, representing the creative and destructive forces of nature. So that's similar, really, to the indigenous. Just that last bit. So, Buddhism's stance on menstruation can vary widely due to its many cultural interpretations across different countries. Theravada Buddhism in Southeast Asia, Mahayana Buddhism in East Asia, and Tibetan Buddhism. In Buddhism, there is no single doctrine that specifically addresses menstruation. Instead, cultural beliefs and local practices shape how menstruation is viewed. In general, Buddhism teaches non attachment and sees all physical processes, including menstruation, as part of. Menstruation is more cultural than doctrinal. Buddhism teaches non attachment and sees all physical processes, including menstruation, as part of the human condition. The impurity or ritual restriction, sometimes associated with menstruation, is more cultural than doctrinal. So, their views potentially on menstruation are in some Buddhist countries like Sri Lanka and Thailand. Cultural practices may prohibit menstruating women from participating in certain religious ceremonies or entering sacred spaces such as temples. These taboos are not universally accepted across all Buddhist traditions and are seen by some as mere social customs rather than religious doctrine. Unlike in other religions, menstruation is not commonly revered or seen as spiritually special in Buddhism. However, it is genuinely not viewed as inherently impure or negative, and there are no religious teachings that promotes shame surrounding menstruation. In some monastic communities, nuns are required to follow specific rules during menstruation, such as refraining from certain rituals, but these rules are not a universal Buddhist teaching, and their application can vary widely. And now we have one which I had no idea about, and I was like, huh? What is this? I need to learn more. Like, I had no idea this religion, yeah, even existed. So there's Unitarian Universalism, which I cannot believe I just said right for the first time. Didn't even need a second try at that. So it is a liberal religion that does not have a single doctrine, but draws from a wide range of sources, including humanitarianism, Christianity, and other world religions. The UU perspective on menstruation is positive and inclusive, aligning with its broader emphasis on human dignity, individual freedom, and respect for all bodies. This sounds amazing so far. So, views on menstruation is that is viewed as a natural biological process. There are no religious prohibitions against menstruating people participating in worship or community activities. The UU values emphasize the empowerment of women and people of all genders, as such as menstruation is not something to be ashamed of, and there is no tradition on stigmatizing or isolating menstruating people in the UU committees. So, the UU have freedom of belief. Unlike many other religions, the UU does not have a single unified creed or set of beliefs. Instead, it encourages people to explore their personal beliefs and values and to respect the diversity of thought within the community. This is based upon the principle that truth can be found in many different sources. The UU committees are often very active in social justice issues, including human rights, environmentalism, equality, and LGBTQ rights. They emphasize the importance of acting with compassion and working toward a more just and peaceful world. The UU is guided by 7 principles, which include commitments to the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equality, and compassion in human relations, respect for the independent web of all existence, and the freedom of conscience. The UU is inclusive of people from all walks of life, welcoming people of diverse faith backgrounds, sexual orientations, genders, races, and abilities. It advocates for the empowerment of marginalized groups, including women, people of color, and LGBTQ individuals. This sounds really awesome. As I've said, like, they don't hold any judgment or anything like that. There's no blame. They don't see it impure. And I thought I'd do some more research because I'm like, I'm sure somebody will say this sounds like this is a 20th century religion that somebody's made up. But actually, its origins trace back to early 16th century during the Reformation, particularly in Europe. Unitarianism rejected the Orthodox Christian doctrine of the Trinity, affirming the oneness of God instead of the true nature. This theological position emerged in parts of Europe like Transylvania, modern day Romania, and Poland, with significant thinkers like Faustus Socinus and Michael Servetus advocating for Unitarian beliefs. It eventually found a place in America in the 18th century, particularly in New England, with congregations forming in cities like Boston. Like, why have I never heard of this? This is amazing. Like, I know I said I was atheist in part one, but like, this sounds more up my street. Where it's just like, you be you. You be you, boo. Like, believe what you want to believe as long as you're safe and everybody around you is safe and you're not doing any harm. This sounds good. The two traditions, Unitarianism and Universalism, were both present in the United States for much the 19th and 20th centuries, often in dialogue with each other. Unitarian Universalism, as a unified religion, was formed in 1961 when the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America officially merged. This created a new non-creedal religion, emphasizing personal spiritual exploration, the free search for truth, and a commitment to social justice. That's crazy. That's so crazy. That's so awesome. Like, my mind is blown. I need personally to do more research about these because this is so cool. So then we have paganism and Wicca. In paganism and Wicca, menstruation is deeply associated with the sacred feminine and the cycles of nature. Many pagan traditions emphasize the connection between the menstrual cycle and the cycles of the moon, fertility, and the earth's rhythms. In Wicca, many pagan paths, the menstrual cycle is closely linked to the phases of the moon, symbolizing renewal, growth, and transformation. This connection evaluates menstruation to a sacred status, aligning it with the energies of the earth, the goddess, and the lunar cycles. Some Wiccans and pagans celebrate a woman's menstrual cycle as a time of personal power, where one's intuitive abilities are enhanced. The belief is that menstruating women hold special spiritual significance, and certain rituals or offerings may be performed during menstruation. The goddess in many pagan traditions represents the feminine principle and is often associated with fertility, creation, and the menstrual cycle. Thus, the menstruation is seen as a natural and powerful process deeply connected to spiritual growth. So that goddess would be the triple goddess. Wicca and other neo-pagan traditions, the triple goddess is a central figure in many neo-pagan and Wiccan traditions. She is typically represented in three aspects: the maiden, youth, new beginnings, and waxing moon; the mother, fertility, nurturing, and full moon; and the crone, wisdom, endings, and waning moon. The mother aspect is closely associated with fertility and menstruation, representing life-giving, power, and feminine. So, Christianity. Certain interpretations. Christianity as a whole does not universally treat menstruation as impure, although there are some cultural variations in different denominations and traditions. Some more conservative or traditional Christian groups may view menstruation with some degree of restriction or taboo, but these views are not widespread across the faith. The Old Testament restrictions. In the Hebrew Bible, particularly the Old Testament, menstruating women are considered ritually impure. Leviticus 15:9-30. However, these laws were part of ancient Jewish purity codes and are generally observed by most modern Christians. The New Testament view does not address menstruation in the same way as the Old Testament. Most mainstream Christian denominations do not view menstruation as impure. Instead, there is an emphasis on grace and spiritual equality, and no religious law forbids menstruating women from participating in church activities. So, we're going to just do a little deep dive into this. So, in the Old Testament, menstruation is associated with ritual purity laws, particularly in the book of Leviticus. For example, in Leviticus 15:19-30, menstruation is described as a time of ritual impurity, where Leviticus 15:19 says, "When a woman has her regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days, and anybody who touches her will be unclean till evening." These laws were part of the holiness code given to the Israelites, outlining what was considered clean and unclean in terms of religious observance. During menstruation, women were seen as ceremonially unclean, and they were expected to refrain from certain religious activities like entering the temple or participating in sacrifices. The focus in the Old Testament was on maintaining ritual purity for the worship of God and menstruation, along with the other bodily functions, was viewed as a condition that required purification before resuming religious activities. However, these laws were specific to the Old Testament, made between God and Israel. They were largely concerned with ritual purity and cleanliness rather than a moral judgment on women themselves. They reflected on the cultural context of the time, where cleanliness, especially in religious settings, was the utmost importance. Now, in the New Testament, introduces a radical shift in the understanding of purity and law, particularly with the teachings of Jesus Christ and the writings of the apostles. In the New Testament, the focus is much more on grace, spiritual equality, and the internal transformation brought about through faith in Christ rather than on external ceremonial laws in those in the Old Testament. Jesus himself challenges the traditional view of ritual purity. He often criticized the Pharisees and religious leaders for focusing on outward rituals and neglecting inner righteousness. For example, Matthew 23:25-26. In Mark 7:14-23, Jesus teaches that it's not what goes into a person's body, such as food or bodily fluids, that defiles them, but what comes out, particularly the thoughts and actions of the heart. This teaching removes the rigid ceremonial barriers that the Old Testament laws placed on bodily functions like menstruation. The New Testament emphasizes that all believers, regardless of gender, social status, or past actions, are accepted by God through grace. For example, in Galatians 3:28, Paul writes, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." This passage speaks to the spiritual equality of men and women, and by extension, it suggests that bodily fluids like menstruation would no longer create a barrier between a woman and her participation in the community of faith. Under the new covenant, the teachings of Christ shift the emphasis from following the law to receiving God's grace. The death and resurrection of Jesus are understood as having fulfilled the law's requirements, rendering many of the Old Testament purity laws, including those around menstruation, obsolete. Hebrews 10:14 says, "For by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy," end quote, signifying that no further rituals or sacrifices are needed for purification. And to go a bit more deeper in that, in most mainstream Christian denominations, there is no religious law that forbids menstruating women from participating in church activities. The New Testament focuses on grace, personal faith, and inner transformation, means that menstruation is not seen as a barrier to religious participation. The Apostle Paul in Galatians 3:28 affirms the spiritual equality of men and women. This principle is fundamental to the modern Christian view of gender roles in the church, with no distinction made based on biological conditions like menstruation. All Christians, regardless of their gender or physical state, are invited to participate fully in worship, communication, or church activities. The New Testament focuses on internal purity rather than external purity. The Apostle Peter writes in 1 Peter 3:3-4, "Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, an unfading beauty, of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight." End quote. This teaching underscores that true spirituality and worth in God's eyes is not dependent on physical cleanliness or adherence to old ceremonial laws, but on the condition of one's heart. Therefore, in mainstream Christian theology, menstruation is not seen as something that would disqualify a woman from participating in the community of faith. There are no specific New Testament verses that would impose restrictions on menstruating women in church. Instead, the emphasis is placed on personal faith and relationship with God. So yeah, I felt like I've learned so much about other religions with doing this episode. Like, I have done hours of research. Now, I didn't really grow up in a religious family, or like the only time I went to church was for funerals. So like my nan would be like, "Oh, if God wanted holes in your ears, he would make them." Like they would say things like that. They wouldn't pray or anything really. Um so yeah, like I didn't have much religion around me or anything like that. So I think that affected me not going into it. Um like life takes you on certain different journeys, and mine just wasn't really religion. It wasn't really what I thought about. Like I just kept trucking in my life. I didn't think that somebody would help me in a way, or I would want to have faith in something. But yeah, I had to be fair, I have had quite a traumatic life. Which I'm sure we would do an episode on at some point, because I would love to do what happens when you're just a dick to your kids. But yeah, this has been so interesting to me. Just because I don't really know that much about religion and I haven't been around it, and yeah, it's opened up my eyes to a lot. But the next religion we're going to talk about, again, this is the research which I did where this is positive on the menstrual cycle. So, in Taoism, menstruation is understood as a natural and essential part of the life force that flows through the body and nature. It is not considered impure, but it is instead seen as a reflection of the body's balance and harmony. Taoism is a philosophical and religious tradition that originated in China over 2,000 years ago. It is centered around living in harmony with the Tao or Tao, which means the way or the path. The Tao is considered the fundamental principle that underlies and flows through all of existence, the natural order of the universe. Taoism emphasizes simplicity, spontaneity, and natural flow of life. Taoist thought emphasizes the balance of yin and yang, with yin often associated with the feminine and the receptive. The menstruation is seen as part of the yin energy flowing in the body and is acknowledged as an important time of internal cleansing and renewal. Menstruation is often viewed as a natural and sacred process. Some Taoist practices may include specific herbal remedies or meditations to support the menstrual cycle, focusing on the restoration of Qi and the preservation of health during this time. Taoism does not impose on a concept of impurity on menstruation. Instead, it is viewed as part of the cycle harmony between body, mind, and nature, with women's cycles celebrated as part of natural order. So, yeah, they were the ones which I found that didn't see it as impure, and I'm so happy that there actually are religions and faiths and beliefs that do see menstruation as harmony and it's beautiful and the body doing what it needs to do. It's so nice. So, we are now going to talk about the duality of menstrual blood, creation versus contamination. The interpretation of menstrual blood varied dramatically across civilizations. Life giving force. In ancient Egypt, menstrual blood was thought to play a role in the creation of life, with some myths suggesting it was a key ingredient in the birth of gods. Impurity and death, in contrast, ancient Hebrew, Hindu, and Greco-Roman traditions increasingly associated menstrual blood with impurity, contamination, and even death, leading to strict purification rituals and exclusion from religious practices. Early medicine and pseudoscience, the toxic purge theory. In ancient and medieval medical systems, the understanding of human biology, especially in relation to women's reproductive health, was rudimentally, at best, without the advanced knowledge of anatomy, psychology, or without the advanced knowledge of anatomy, physiology, or the menstrual cycle that we have today, early medicine theories often misinterpreted menstruation as a process linked to imbalance or illness, rather than a natural and healthy part of a woman's reproductive system. So, what is the toxic purge concept? One of the most relevant yet entirely incorrect theories about menstruation in early medicine was the idea that the menstrual cycle was a toxic purge, or a way for a woman to rid their bodies of harmful substances. This theory can be traced back to ancient medical philosophies, particularly those of the Greeks and Romans, who had a limited understanding of human anatomy and a strong focus on the balance of the body's humors. In the context of ancient Greek medicine, physicians like Hippocrates and Galen proposed that the body was made up of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and health was dependent on the balance between them. In this worldview, menstruation was seen as a means of expelling excess or bad blood from the body to restore harmony. The idea was that women, who were believed to have a naturally warmer or moister constitution than men, needed to periodically purge these imbalances through menstruation. However, because the medical knowledge at the time was limited, the quote toxic aspect of menstruation was often overemphasized. Rather than recognizing the menstrual cycle as part of a healthy reproductive system, menstruation was frequently seen as a symptom of an internal disorder or an indication that something was wrong with a woman's body. The blood lost during menstruation was often seen as polluted or unclean in many cultures, which further reinforced the idea that menstruation was a process of cleansing. So now we're going to talk about the humoral theory and menstrual flow. The humoral theory, which dominated Western medicine for over a millennium, also played a significant role in shaping early medical attitudes towards menstruation. According to this theory, the body's health was dependent on the balance of the four humors, and when the balance was disrupted, illness would occur. Menstruation, therefore, was often framed as a necessary event to restore the body's natural equilibrium. In this context, if a woman experienced excessive menstrual bleeding, it was often attributed to an overabundance of blood, while scanty periods were seen as a sign of deficiency or a lack of proper circulation. Some early medical practitioners believed that menstruation could be a sign of the body expelling excess humors that could lead to disease or dysfunction. As a result, women's menstrual cycles were often treated as indicators of their overall health, and menstruation itself was something perceived as a form of illness rather than a healthy bodily function. In addition to the toxic purge theory, early medical views on menstruation also contributed to the long-standing association between menstruation and the female weakness. Ancient Greek physicians believed that menstruating women were more vulnerable to disease, and their bodies were thought to be more susceptible to infections and imbalance during their periods. The belief was compounded by the idea that menstruation somehow weakened a woman's body. For instance, Galen, one of the most influential medical thinkers, suggested that women's menstrual blood was deficient blood, unable to be used for reproduction, which made it a waste product. This view further implied that menstruating women were less capable of performing physically demanding tasks or leading a full and active life. As a result, women were often advised to rest, avoiding strenuous physical activities, and adhere to specific dietary regimens to prevent further weakening during their menstrual cycles. This view of menstruation as a physical weakness contributed to the historical marginalization of women in many cultures, reinforcing the idea that women's biological processes rendered them physically and mentally less capable than men. In the ancient ages, this concept evolved into a more religiously based interpretation of menstruation, with many cultures linking menstruation to notions of impurity or sin, which led the idea of menstruating women were not only particularly weaker, but also morally or spiritually flawed. In the absence of accurate medical knowledge, some early treatments for menstruation related issues were based on the belief that menstruation needed to be regulated or controlled to prevent harm. For instance, women suffering from heavy menstrual bleeding were sometimes prescribed bloodletting, which was believed to restore the balance of humors and stop excessive flow. This treatment, which was common practice for various ailments, was based on a false assumption that blood loss was inherently dangerous and needed to be managed. Similarly, various herbal concoctions and potions were created to either promote or suppress menstrual flow. Some herbs, like parsley and juniper, were thought to stimulate menstruation and cleanse the body, while others were believed to halt or reduce bleeding. These remedies were grounded in the toxic purge theory, with the underlying assumption that menstruation was an unnatural and harmful process that needed to be managed or corrected. While some of these remedies may have had mild effects, many were not only inefficient but potentially harmful, exacerbating menstrual problems rather than alleviating them. The toxic purge theory was not confined to Western medicine alone. Many other ancient cultures also believed in similar concepts, though the specifics varied. For instance, in ancient Egypt medicine, the concept of menstruation as a purification process was also present. The Egyptians believed that menstrual blood had the power to cleanse a woman's body, and it was often linked to rituals or spiritual purification. However, similar to Greek and Roman views, the idea also carried negative connotations of menstruation as a sign of some inheritable imbalance. In medieval Europe, the idea of menstruation as a purge was compounded by the influence of religious beliefs, particularly the Christian view of menstruation as a form of impurity. The association of menstruation with sin and impurity further fueled the idea that menstruating women were somehow unclean or in need of purification. This led to religious prescriptions and restrictions on menstruating women, including their exclusion from sacred rituals and church activities, among other things, as we've discussed previously in other paragraphs of this episode. So yeah, that was the toxic purge theory, along with a few other things dotted in there. It's crazy how they think they can cure us. Hippocrates, Galen, and many other people. And it's just so very interesting that Hippocrates, the father of medicine, which you thought about this? Like, this is what he thought, the quote, father of medicine. And his mates were just like, yeah, this is bad. Like, how can you say that you're the father of medicine? It baffles me, it really does. So, the spiritual power to social control. What began as ancient myths about menstrual magic and fertility gradually evolved into systems of control that dictated how women lived, worshipped, and were perceived in society. By framing menstruation as unclean rather than powerful, religious and patriarchal structures were able to exclude women from leadership roles, justify their subordination, and enforce strict gender norms, a legacy that still influences menstrual stigma today, which I think is very, very clear that this still happens with everything which I've said. Hello. Right, so I'm butting in. I think I'm going to add this near the end of part 2. So I absolutely forgotten to add in Satanism. Like, what the heck? It is one of the religions which, like, I can kind of relate to because, bear with me, it is about freedom again. It is all about freedom, and there's different pathways to it. But yeah, I absolutely totally forgotten to speak about it because it is a religion. So, how do they see menstruation? Unlike some religious traditions that may view menstruation with certain stigmas or restrictions, modern Satanism, particularly in the context of the Church of Satan, tends to approach it differently. The Church of Satan, founded in 1966 by Anton LaVey, is based on principles of individualism, self-empowerment, and questioning religious norms. They prioritize bodily autonomy and personal freedom, which extends to menstruation. In Satanism, menstruating individuals are encouraged to embrace their natural cycles without shame or taboo. This perspective aligns with Satanism's broader ethos of challenging social norms and encouraging personal empowerment. Menstruation is seen as natural, powerful aspect of life, celebrated as part of the human experience. So when it comes to menstruation, Satanism embraces a view that's all about personal empowerment and breaking free from traditional stigmas. And I also did research that the Satanic Temple actively works to combat menstrual stigma through initiatives like their quote Menstruation with Satan campaign. This annual drive collects and distributes menstrual hygiene products to individuals who face barriers to access, such as those experiencing poverty or homelessness. By addressing menstrual equity, they aim to dismantle the stigma surrounding menstruation and promote dignity for all. Their efforts are rooted in their core tenets, which emphasize compassion, bodily autonomy, and adherence to scientific understanding. They challenge outdated notions and advocate for open conversations about menstruation as a natural and normal process. Like, that's amazing. That's really amazing. For something which has been portrayed so evil and so wrong. Aside from the Happy to Bleed campaign, this is the only other campaign which I have found that helps give hygiene products out. And it's just like, wow, the more you know. So yeah, I really wanted to highlight that because I feel like Satanists do get a bad rap. And honestly, I would love to do a podcast episode about them because it is another religion that does very much interest me. Also, to add to this, the Satanic Temple also uses its platform to challenge laws and policies that perpetuate menstrual stigma. For example, they've advocated for the removal of taxes on menstrual products, referred to as the tampon tax, absolutely, arguing that such tax unfairly burdens menstruating individuals. They also push for comprehensive sex education that includes accurate information about menstruation, aiming to normalize it and dispel myths. Their approach is about creating some systematic change while also fostering a culture of acceptance and empowerment. It's a mix of activism, education, and direct support. I think is amazing. And that's where I'm going to leave it because, like, it's amazing. So, yeah, I'm just going to add this bit in, just in it at some point. Alright, thank you for listening. So, we've actually done more than half an hour of speaking. And I have many, many, many pages left to talk about. So I am going to end this episode here, I think. And yeah, thank you very, very much for listening to Behind the Paddle podcast. This is part 2 on menstruation and religions. If you want to support us, please put a review. Please give us some feedback. If you have any topics you would like to discuss, please give me all the topics. Give me everything. And of course, if you want to see the spicier version of this podcast episode, rather than listening to it, then you can hop over to our Dark Fans and our mini vids. So yeah, this has been Behind the Paddle podcast. I'm Paulson Victoria. Thank you all for listening, and goodbye.